John Morgan carefully completed the last set of documents Luke had handed him. These papers were critical for managing one of the firm's most significant portfolios, a responsibility that still fell under John's direct supervision. The portfolio belonged to David Finnegan, a billionaire investor known as Rob Finnegan, who had built a reputation for his aggressive business tactics. Rob would acquire stock in companies to gain control, dismantle their assets, and inflate his investment's value, often persuading others to join in while ensuring his gains outweighed any losses they might suffer. He didn't concern himself with those left worse off in the aftermath. As Rob's lawyer and unofficial moral compass, John worked hard to ensure Rob stayed within the boundaries of the law. With regulatory agencies like the SEC closely monitoring individuals like Finnegan, John's diligence kept Rob compliant, enabling his wealth to grow while avoiding legal troubles. This success not only benefited Rob but also brought considerable revenue to the firm. C. Hughes and Green. Meanwhile, Luke was making great progress in taking over most of John's portfolios. Over the past few months, John had been gradually transitioning his regular clients to Luke, who was on track to assume full responsibility in just 2 weeks. However, John's high-profile clients, such as Finnegan, remained in his hands. Other than Luke, only Sarah Hughes and Peter Green were aware of John's retirement plans. It was a decision John had struggled with, but he reminded himself that it was time to step away and focus on his personal life. John had spent decades transforming a modest storefront law office into one of Columbus, Ohio's most prestigious firms. Alongside Sarah and Peter, he had built a powerhouse, but it had come at a cost. The relentless demands of his career had taken a toll on his personal life, particularly his marriage to Emma. Last month, they celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary, but it only served as a reminder of how much their relationship had changed. The couple had 2 college-age children, Liam, 19, and Grace, 18, both excelling in their studies. Their life appeared comfortable and successful on the surface, but John couldn't ignore the growing distance between him and Emma. She had become emotionally and physically distant, and their once passionate intimacy had all but disappeared. Emma brushed off her lack of interest as a temporary issue, claiming she'd address it with her doctor, a promise she had been postponing for nearly a year. John's efforts to reignite their love life had been met with little more than apathy, leaving him frustrated and resigned. What made things worse were Emma's frequent trips to her hometown of Mansfield, Ohio. She said these visits were to help her aging mother and her sister Amanda, who had remained in Mansfield after a rough divorce. Over the past 6 months, these bi-weekly trips had become routine, with Emma leaving Thursday mornings and returning late Sunday nights. Although she called John every evening and kept her phone on, her absence left him feeling increasingly alone. This morning was no different. Emma packed for another trip, and John couldn't help but feel a pang of disappointment, trying to gauge her interest or maybe stir up some jealousy. He mentioned he was working on a surprise with Sarah that would be ready in a few weeks. But Emma's reaction was lukewarm at best. She nodded vaguely and went back to packing. Resigned, John kissed her goodbye and left for work, knowing she'd be gone by the time he returned. Later that day, John finished up in his office and stopped by Chloe's desk to wrap up the day's tasks. With everything finalized, he headed down the hallway to Sarah's office. Knocking once, he pushed the door open, a gesture his colleagues had come to expect from him. Sarah greeted him warmly. John suggested they call it a day and unwind over drinks, but Sarah declined. She had plans to attend her son's school play with her husband, Ethan. Her son, Ethan Jr., had the starring role in Pirates of Doom. John joked about the inevitable bias parents have when watching their kids perform, and Sarah laughed, agreeing. At 46, Sarah's life seemed effortlessly balanced. Happily married for over a decade, she managed to juggle work and family with ease. John couldn't help but admire her for it. She reassured him that the firm's latest project was progressing smoothly and that Luke's involvement wasn't needed yet, though she did express concerns about John's upcoming retirement. Sarah admitted she hoped to persuade John to reconsider retiring, acknowledging how instrumental he'd been in elevating the firm to its current prominence. John responded with genuine kindness, praising her leadership and expressing confidence in the next generation of talent. He specifically highlighted Luke's dedication and hinted at the idea of promoting Olivia Turner to partner in the near future. Sarah, visibly impressed by John's faith in their team, agreed that both Olivia and Luke had reattainable potential. She also mentioned that Kieran, another rising star at the firm, would be attending the upcoming retirement party. John smiled, pleased with the direction the firm was headed, and bid Sarah good night, promising to see her tomorrow. On the drive back to his expansive estate in the Columbus suburbs, his thoughts drifted to the solitude awaiting him. The sprawling 5-acre property boasted a luxurious 5,000-square-foot home, complete with a hot tub cascading into a pool, a cabana, 2 tennis courts, and vibrant gardens that added bursts of color through summer and autumn. Yet, with Liam and Grace off at college and Emma's frequent absences, the once lively house now felt uncomfortably hollow. After the kids left for school, Emma had let go of the cook and maid, leaving John alone to navigate the silence. Recognizing the house was far too big for just the two of them, Emma had suggested downsizing a few times. However, she always added they could wait a couple more years before making any final decisions. John pulled into the spacious 4-car garage and stepped into the kitchen, tossing a frozen dinner into the microwave. As it heated, he headed upstairs to change into something more comfortable. While descending the staircase, the landline rang. John hoped it was a response to one of his classified ads. It was too early for Emma's nightly call. Picking up, he was pleased to hear from a potential buyer interested in his 32-foot sailboat, which he kept moored at Lake Erie during the warmer months and stored away for winter. The call went smoothly. The buyer, who had already taken the boat out for a test run with the marina owner acting as a proxy, agreed to send a cashier's check to the P.O. box John provided. Once payment was confirmed, the title, already reviewed by the buyer, would be ready for pickup at the marina. With the deal effectively sealed, John felt a wave of relief. Emma, who had always hated the boat and hadn't joined him on the water in years, would undoubtedly be thrilled it was finally sold. With the boat gone and his Jaguar and Audi promised to the highest bidders, John felt like he was ticking off the final boxes on his retirement to-do list. The house, he admitted to himself, might take longer to sell, but he and Emma could transition comfortably to the smaller bungalow he had already begun furnishing. Any extra items they needed could easily be bought later. That evening, John ate his microwaved meal absent-mindedly, barely tasting it. Seeking distraction, he grabbed a cold Miller Lite and settled into the entertainment room for some mindless TV. He ended up watching adult content but found himself critiquing the lack of originality in the performances. The actors' predictable routines and lack of creativity failed to hold his interest. Shaking his head at the monotony, he turned his attention elsewhere, resisting the temptation to linger. At exactly 9 p.m., the phone rang. It was Emma. John answered, asking if her trip had gone smoothly. She reassured him it had been uneventful, adding that her mother seemed slightly better, though her sister Amanda was feeling stressed. Emma then floated the idea of staying an extra day to help Amanda, asking if John would be okay with it. A knot tightened in his stomach, but he brushed it off, telling her to do whatever she thought was best. To hide his discomfort, he mentioned how busy work was keeping him and how quiet the house felt without her. When John brought up how little she'd packed for the trip, Emma explained she had left enough belongings in Mansfield during previous visits to get by. Shifting the conversation, she expressed a hint of curiosity about the surprise John had mentioned earlier. Surprised but pleased by her interest, John assured her everything was on track and that Sarah was wrapping up her part. Emma promised to call again the next night and ended the call with a curt goodnight. John couldn't help but notice that she hadn't reciprocated his "I love you," Emma had said on the phone the night before, but there was nothing behind it. No warmth, no affection. John smiled bitterly as he hung up, brushing it off as her being preoccupied with her family obligations. Deep down, though, he knew better. Emma's family, especially her meddlesome mother and scandal-plagued sister Amanda, had always been a sore spot for him. Her mother's constant interference and Amanda's ruined reputation, thanks to an affair during her marriage, left John feeling nothing but indifference toward them. Sighing, he resigned himself to the solitude of the weekend. To pass the time, John called Liam and Grace. The conversation lifted his spirits for over an hour as they chatted about school, life, and their upcoming visit in 2 weeks. After hanging up, John drifted off into a restless sleep on the couch, waking in the middle of the night with a stiff neck. He shuffled to bed, collapsing into a dreamless slumber, something he welcomed after weeks of nightmares that had left him drained. The next 2 weeks passed predictably. John focused on wrapping up his remaining cases and making sure Luke was fully prepared to step into his role. By the second week, he began calling clients to inform them of his impending retirement. Most were supportive, congratulating him and agreeing to work with Luke. A few required additional reassurance from Sarah or Peter, and John quickly arranged those calls. By the time Emma left for Mansfield again on Thursday, John had managed to keep his retirement plans completely under wraps. Emma, uninterested in his work, hadn't asked about the details, and she seemed to have forgotten about the surprise he'd hinted at earlier. John decided to save that revelation for Sunday morning, when she would either confirm her return or announce she'd stay another day. Friday ethaned John's final day at the firm, a whirlwind of activity. He worked with Chloe to clean out his office, transferring files and responsibilities to Luke. By mid-morning, he had routed all new inquiries to Luke, who was taking over Chloe as his secretary. The transition had been smooth and seamless. Between tasks, John checked in with Sarah to confirm that everything was ready for his retirement party that evening. Sarah reassured him it was all set before heading off to the courthouse. She promised she'd return in time for the event at the Radisson Hotel. Though everyone understood Emma wouldn't be attending, it didn't dampen the enthusiasm for the celebration. It was shaping up to be a memorable send-off. After lunch, John tackled a series of last-minute tasks, wrapping everything up by mid-afternoon. By 3 p.m., he had signed the final paperwork for the sale of the house. Movers were already hard at work, with clear instructions to finish by late Saturday afternoon. Once the movers completed their job, a cleaning crew John had hired would come in to ensure the house was spotless. To motivate them, John promised a generous bonus for finishing on time. His realtors had already assured him that the for sale sign would be up the next morning, and they had a list of interested buyers ready to view the property starting Monday. Strategically pricing the house, John had prioritized a quick sale that aligned with both his needs and the realtor's expectations. Later that afternoon, John finalized his financial arrangements. Over the years, he and Emma had maintained separate accounts alongside their joint ones. Each carried only one credit card, a rule John had insisted on to prevent accumulating credit debt. Emma, ever practical with money, managed the household accounts with care. She knew about John's professional accounts but had never shown much interest in the firm's private finances. As time went on, she seemed to forget about their existence altogether. In preparation for his retirement, John had closed all their joint accounts, transferring the remaining balances into a new brokerage account solely in his name. For now, he planned to handle their shared expenses in cash until they settled into their new life. Unbeknownst to Emma, their future wouldn't even be in the United States. Quietly, John had moved their finances offshore, opening international accounts with branches in Europe and South America. He felt confident that Emma's financial savvy would allow her to adapt quickly to this new arrangement. Finally, John confirmed their travel plans. 2 first-class tickets to a luxurious Costa Rican resort awaited them. The plan was to spend the next several months basking on sunlit beaches, sailing, horseback riding, and enjoying ultimate relaxation. John had even taken a solo trip to the resort earlier to ensure it lived up to his high standards. Completely satisfied, he tasked Chloe with double-checking all the bookings. By the end of the day, everything was aligned for a seamless transition. After years of building an impressive career, John's retirement felt both earned and overdue. His work representing high-profile clients in intricate legal battles had brought him not only recognition but also significant financial success. Charging premium fees and leveraging his expertise, John had accumulated substantial wealth. Over the years, he discreetly moved much of his fortune into offshore accounts, completely legal but strategically out of reach of U.S. tax codes and courts. These accounts, unknown to Emma, contained amounts that would likely leave her stunned if she ever discovered them. Emma had often encouraged John to retire, frustrated by the countless hours he spent at the office. Yet, over the past year, the subject had faded from conversation, and John assumed that finally stepping away from his work would genuinely delight her. He kept his plans entirely under wraps, waiting to reveal everything during her Sunday morning call. By then, every detail would be in place. Friday evening, John attended his retirement party at the Radisson Hotel. It was a lively affair filled with laughter, dancing, and heartfelt conversations. John made a point of dancing with all the women and swapping stories with the men, recounting some of the most fascinating cases of his career. Luke stayed close for much of the evening, eagerly absorbing every bit of advice and wisdom John could share. John had high hopes for Luke, seeing him as a vital part of the firm's future. Sarah and Peter, who were privy to the broader scope of John's plans, had been sworn to secrecy. As his trusted attorneys, they had helped execute the finer details. Sarah, in particular, seemed to relish her role in coordinating the surprise for Emma. As they danced, she reassured John that everything was on track, noting that every check and transaction had been carefully documented to ensure nothing went awry. When John mentioned the Costa Rica plans, Sarah teased him playfully but offered her heartfelt congratulations. John laughed and suggested she and her husband Ethan consider taking a similar step someday. Sarah smiled, saying she loved her work too much to leave it behind just yet, but promised to relay John's regards to Peter, who had jokingly complained about being excluded from their secret plotting. John stayed at the party until almost midnight before finally heading home. When he arrived, he noticed a missed call from Emma. Listening to the voicemail, he heard her say she'd be staying at her mother's house that night because her mother needed rest and was already asleep. She asked John not to call and promised to reach out the next evening instead. John, unsurprised, knew she wouldn't call again that night. With the message lingering in his mind, John spent the rest of the night carefully packing both his and Emma's belongings. He was determined to avoid unnecessary trips after the movers finished their work the next day. Meticulously, he ensured every detail was accounted for, organizing everything to make the transition seamless. By the time he was done, his plans were in perfect order. Early Saturday morning, John prepared to transfer everything to the bungalow. He redirected all calls to his new cell phone and made one final call to confirm the last piece of his surprise was set in motion. Exhausted from the previous evening but satisfied with his progress, he fell into a deep sleep, confident that nothing would derail his carefully laid plans. Saturday brought the final wave of packing and moving. As the movers transported the furniture from the house, John felt a touch of sadness, but he shrugged it off. The house had been part of a chapter he was ready to close. Leaving the movers to their work, John drove to the bungalow, where Liam and Grace were scheduled to arrive around noon. He planned to use their visit to reveal his retirement and the larger surprises he had kept hidden. While they knew he was stepping back from work, they had no idea about Costa Rica or the other changes in store. When Liam and Grace arrived, John greeted them warmly and ushered them inside. Wasting no time, he sat them down and explained everything. He kept it concise but clear, answering their questions and expanding on the details as needed. As expected, neither of them was thrilled by the drastic changes. John reassured them, emphasizing that their college tuition was fully covered and that they'd always have a home, wherever that might be. He explained that retiring was a decision he and Emma had made together and that the timing felt right for both of them. The kids expressed a desire to call their mother, but John insisted they wait until Sunday night when she was due to return. Though reluctant, they agreed, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics as the family settled into the bungalow's cozy atmosphere. That evening, the three of them, John, Liam, and Grace, went out for dinner. They kept things light and deliberately avoided heavier topics as they waited for Emma's usual 9 p.m. call. When it came, the kids stayed quiet while John answered. True to form, Emma kept the conversation brief, confirming she'd be home as planned without mentioning any intention to extend her stay. John took her at her word, expecting her back the following evening, though a familiar doubt lingered in his mind. After the call, Liam and Grace shared their lingering concerns about John's plans, looking for reassurance that he was certain about the decisions he had made. John affirmed that everything was going exactly as he had intended and assured them he was at peace with his choice. Later, Liam and Grace settled into the bungalow's spare room, each taking one of the twin beds, while John made a final round of calls to ensure everything was on track. The movers had confirmed their work was complete, and the cleaning crew had left the house spotless, ready for showings. With everything checked off his list, John turned in for the night, exhausted but feeling a deep sense of accomplishment. Sunday dawned quietly, bringing an unusual stillness after the whirlwind of recent days. With most of the work behind him, John had little to do but wait. A quick visit to the house reassured him that everything was in perfect order. The movers and cleaners had done an impeccable job. By mid-morning, John was back at the bungalow, anticipating Emma's call to let him know she was heading home. She typically called between 10 and 10:30, and when the phone rang, John answered immediately, his voice carrying an edge of nervousness as he asked if she was ready to start for home. There was hesitation on the other end, followed by a strained reply. Emma said she wanted to stay a few more days to help Amanda with errands and give her sister more time to get things done. Her careful tone made it clear she was bracing for John's reaction, fully aware of how much he despised these sudden extensions. As her words sank in, John felt a surge of emotion he'd been suppressing for months. Anger, tightly controlled for so long, began to crack through his calm exterior. She wanted to stay longer? He already knew why. John had known for over 3 months, long enough to plan his next steps. The time for restraint had passed. His voice tight with fury, he sarcastically told Emma she was welcome to stay as long as she liked with Patrick. The name fell like a bomb, shattering the facade he'd maintained for months. His voice rose as he continued, accusing her not only of being involved with Patrick but also with another man, Ethan. Months of frustration poured out as John yelled, venting everything he'd been forced to keep bottled up. On the other end, there was only silence, broken by a single sob before the line abruptly disconnected. Staring at the phone in his hand, John felt blindsided. Emma had hung up. The abruptness left him stunned, his anger suspended in midair with nowhere to land. Shaking, he set the phone down, his hands trembling as leftover rage turned to an uneasy emptiness. He slumped into a chair, trying to process what had just happened. The room felt unnaturally quiet until the sharp ring of another phone shattered the silence. The sound startled him. It was the disposable phone he'd purchased specifically for this situation. Without voicemail to deflect the call, it kept ringing, forcing him to answer. Finally, he picked it up, managing only a terse yes. Whatever anger remained fizzled out, replaced by a hollow numbness. He had anticipated a screaming match, a cathartic confrontation to release the pain and betrayal he had carried for so long. Instead, Emma's abrupt silence had left him cold and empty. The voice on the other end snapped him out of his haze. It was Amanda, livid and demanding to know what he had said to Emma. She accused him of causing her sister's near-hysterical state, her tone dripping with blame and concern. John redirected his resentment toward Amanda, seeing her as complicit in Emma's betrayal. His reply was cold and sarcastic, claiming he had merely told Emma to stay as long as she liked, with Patrick. Amanda sputtered, trying to defend her sister, but John wasn't interested in hearing excuses. As far as he was concerned, they were both guilty. Amanda's words only deepened his disdain, and he ended the call abruptly, tossing the disposable phone onto the table. Leaning back in his chair, John stared at the ceiling, the reality of the situation sinking in. The meticulous plan he had spent months crafting was no longer about surprises or clever moves. It was about regaining control of his life, starting now. As the minutes ticked by, anger simmered just beneath the surface. John's voice was sharp as he replayed the call with Amanda in his mind, accusing both her and Emma of enabling deceit. He detailed their meetings with Patrick and Ethan at the motel, his anger flaring as he tried to keep from shouting. Amanda pleaded with him to let Emma explain, insisting that things weren't what they seemed. She called it a stupid mistake, trying desperately to defend her sister. Amanda's voice faltered as she stammered, "John, it's not what you think. You have to let Emma explain. Please, Don't do anything drastic. Just wait until she gets home. But John had heard enough. His tone, cold and unyielding, left no room for negotiation. Someone will be there when she gets back, he said flatly. But it won't be me. Amanda gasped, trying desperately to argue. But John continued, his voice steady and firm. He accused Emma of throwing away their marriage for her affair with Patrick, dismissing any excuses Amanda might offer. She's made her choice clear, John said. She wants to keep her fling going. I'm not sticking around for this. Amanda's pleas grew more frantic. John, you told the kids? She asked, her voice rising in disbelief. How could you do that? They didn't need to know. They deserved to know the truth, John snapped. And they handled it better than I expected. Better than you or Emma, that's for sure. Amanda tried one last time to reason with him, her voice trembling with desperation. Please, John, give her a chance. Let her explain. There's still hope. You can fix this together. But John cut her off with icy resolve. It wasn't me who destroyed this family, Amanda. It was you and Emma. Don't try to pin this on me. He ended the call with a bitter final wreath and, say goodbye to your mother for me. I'm sure she's laughing her skinny ass off about all of this. His words were drenched in venom as he hung up, tossing the phone onto the table. John stood in silence for a moment, surveying the modest bungalow. It was small, quiet, a far cry from the life he had built with Emma. She'll love it, he muttered sarcastically, the irony heavy in his tone. A sharp, bitter laugh escaped his lips as he turned away. He methodically switched off the lights and placed a spare set of keys on the table alongside a letter addressed to Emma. Without looking back, he stepped out the front door, pulling it shut behind him. Sliding into the rental car, he started the engine and drove off, leaving behind the house, the lies, and the years of pain. When he arrived at Chloe's apartment, she was already waiting outside, her 3 suitcases neatly stacked beside her. She smiled brightly as John pulled up, her excitement palpable. John stepped out of the car, loading her luggage into the trunk before opening the passenger door for her. Ready? He asked. Chloe's smile lingered as she looked up at him. More than ready, she replied. Do you know how hard it's been seeing you at work every day and not being able to touch you or even talk to you properly? Emma didn't know what she had, but I did. I'm just lucky I found you when she threw you away. As they drove, Chloe opened up about her feelings. She mentioned how she had always sensed something was off about Amanda, especially when she encouraged Emma to extend her stays. The way she said it, Chloe explained, made it clear there was more going on, like Emma spending time with Patrick and Ethan was some kind of game. She admitted to feeling a brief pang of guilt, but said it had quickly given way to relief. This what we have, it feels real. It's nothing like the chaos and lies Emma left behind. Chloe smiled at John again, her confidence growing as they drove further away from the turmoil. John nodded, his grip on the steering wheel tightening. For the first time in months, he felt a sense of liberation. Meanwhile, back in Mansfield, Emma was unraveling. John's accusations echoed in her mind, each word cutting deeper than the last. He knew. He had known for months. The weight of that realization made her stomach churn. Her hands shook as she grabbed her car keys and bolted out of Amanda's kitchen, ignoring her sister's frantic protests. Emma couldn't stay, she had to get home. She had to fix this. Patrick and Ethan had been nothing but distractions, she told herself, meaningless in the grand scheme of things. John was the one who mattered, the only man she had ever truly loved. The usual 4-hour drive to Columbus became a desperate race against time. Pushing her car to its limits, she ignored speed limits and the risk of being pulled over. She couldn't let John leave. She had to reach him before it was too late. Tears blurred her vision as she whispered to herself, I'll never see Patrick or Ethan again. I'll cut off Amanda if I have to. Anything to fix this. Anything to keep him. Mile after mile, Emma rehearsed what she would say. She'd confess everything, beg for his forgiveness, and promise to change. Patrick and Ethan had been nothing more than an escape from the monotony. She rationalized. But that didn't matter anymore. All that mattered was John. As she neared Columbus, Emma's resolve hardened. Yet deep down, a gnawing fear told her it might already be too late. The thought churned in her mind over and over as she sped toward what she could only hope wasn't the end of her marriage. I rehearsed the words over and over in my head, desperate to find a way to make John listen, to make him see this wasn't the end. The explanation I had crafted felt weak and fragile, but it was all I had. I told myself that I'd been seduced, not just by Patrick or Ethan, but by Amanda and her reckless lifestyle. She had whispered smooth assurances, convincing me that stepping outside my marriage was a way to fix what was broken. The lack of intimacy is the problem, she'd said, planting the idea that letting go could save me. Her advice was insidious. She suggested being with someone I didn't need to please or care about might rekindle the part of me I'd lost, that it could reawaken my passion. Amanda had insisted John would benefit in the end. I believed her. I told myself it wasn't an affair. It was a cure, a temporary fix to bring me back to my husband. But what began as a misguided solution had spiraled into something I never anticipated. I wasn't just drawn to the physical connection. I was consumed by the forbidden thrill, the danger, the reckless abandon. It was supposed to help us. I whispered aloud to the empty car, clinging to the words like a lifeline. I can make him understand. He'll listen, he has to. But as the miles stretched on, doubt crept in. 100 miles into the drive, a new question surfaced, clawing at my mind. Why didn't that passion ever carry over to John? In the 6 months since it began, we hadn't made love once. There was no answer, none that made sense. The truth was as damning as the question itself. I couldn't even convince myself, let alone John. My mind scrambled for something, anything, that might explain it as I pushed the car faster, the engine straining under the pressure of my urgency. When I finally pulled into our driveway, my heart plummeted. 4 cars were parked there. 2 belonged to Liam and Grace, and the sight of them filled me with confusion and dread. What were they doing here? The other 2 cars were unfamiliar, and their presence deepened the knot in my stomach. I steered onto the grass in my haste, slamming the car into park before bolting out. My breath came in shallow bursts as I ran toward the house. A man I didn't recognize stepped out of one of the unfamiliar cars, moving to intercept me. "Mrs. Morgan?" he asked, his tone calm but firm. I ignored him, fumbling for my keys as I reached the front door. My hands trembled as I slid the key into the lock, but it wouldn't turn. I tried again, and again. Then the realization hit me like a slap to the face. The lock had been changed. "No," I gasped, my voice breaking. "No, no, no." I threw the useless key onto the porch and pounded on the door, ignoring the sharp pain as my fists slammed against the wood. "John, let me in. Please, John," I screamed, tears streaming down my face. The man stood silently nearby, waiting until I had exhausted myself. When I finally turned to him, trembling and broken, he stepped forward and handed me an envelope. "You are served, madam," he said, his voice low but professional. I stared at the envelope, my mind struggling to comprehend. Before I could speak, he produced a second, smaller envelope. "These are the keys to your new residence," he explained. "The address is inside, along with the deed and all necessary documentation. The property is yours, free and clear." I took the envelopes numbly, my mind spinning. Then he pulled out a third, a larger, legal-sized envelope. "This contains checks representing the balances of your former savings and checking accounts, which have been closed. The proceeds from the sale of this house will be transferred to you once the sale is complete. Everything is detailed in the divorce paperwork." His words hit me like hammer blows, each one driving the weight of my situation deeper into my chest. Finally, he handed me a business card. "This is the contact information for your husband's attorney, Ms. Sarah Hughes." At the mention of her name, a flicker of anger surged within me, but it fizzled out just as quickly. Sarah had always been a source of resentment for me, a wedge I used to make John feel guilty, even though I knew it was baseless. Now, all those petty grievances felt laughably small in the face of what I had done. Then I saw her, Sarah herself, walking toward me from one of the cars. Her expression was calm but unyielding, her presence commanding. "Hello, Emma," she said coolly. "You're not looking your best today." I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came. Sarah continued, her tone sharp and matter-of-fact. "John asked me to handle things in his absence, and I'm here to do just that. In case you're wondering, he retired on Friday. We had a big party to celebrate. It was wonderful. Too bad you missed it. But then again, you had more important things to do, didn't you?" Her words landed like daggers, each one sharper than the last. She detailed the arrangements John had made. The house had been transferred into his name via a power of attorney I had signed long ago. It was now listed for sale, with the proceeds designated for me. He had also purchased and furnished a bungalow in my name. Then Sarah delivered the final blow. "John has left the country. I believe it's his intention not to return for quite some time. He's with someone now, someone who cares for him. He will not speak to you or entertain any attempts at reconciliation. The divorce is final as far as he's concerned." Her words crushed me. My legs buckled, and I sank to the ground, clutching the envelopes as tears poured down my face. I was more alone than I had ever been in my life. John was gone, and with him the foundation of everything I cared about. When I turned toward Liam and Grace, the anger and disappointment in their faces broke me further. Their disgust was palpable, a mirror of the shame I felt but couldn't escape. I collapsed in front of them, sobbing uncontrollably. Liam helped me to my feet, but there was no comfort in his touch, only cold indifference. Grace stood stiffly, her arms crossed, her expression hard and unforgiving. Their rejection was more painful than anything I had ever felt. In losing John, I had also lost my children's love and respect. I had destroyed my family, and there was no undoing it. As I looked back at the house, our home, the weight of my actions pressed down on me. It wasn't mine anymore. Nothing was. "What have I done?" I whispered, the words empty in the face of my regret. No answer came, only silence.